Alright, it's time for the final transplant of my tomatoes. It's third week of April. I don't know if you use these razor blade knives very often. Do you ever lose a little blade protector? Keeps you from cutting yourself? When I'm going to use this all day, I just put it in the pouch that it came out of, and it's always there when I go to put it up. I use a razor blade knife because it's just easier to handle. I'm not trying to get anybody to buy this particular brand. I've always used, we use it a lot. It has a line right across there, and that's about where you cut them. And you'll have a double seam on one corner. But a razor blade knife will go through it pretty good if you just take your time. I try to start where the double seam is, and then when I'm cutting the rest of the way, it's all single seam. You can see that there is a little seam up in that corner. After you do that, you need a hole in it. You'll notice that the bottom of this has got a seam across it. That's where it's overlapped. So the best place to put a hole is right there and right there, because it's single layered rather than where the seam is. It doesn't matter if you got a good punch. If you haven't seen the other video, I talked about this punch. This is a piece of metal that held a ceiling fan in its cradle. Had two pins in it. All I did is sharpened one end. And I have to resharpen it every 3 or 4 years. And I just stick it two perfectly good holes. See how clean they are? You want to rinse these out pretty good. Orange juice isn't so bad. The milk, you really need to rinse them out a lot. Orange juice will mold up too. Never put the cap back on them after you rinse them out. Let them drain as much as you can, and then let them air dry on a porch or something where it won't get wet. And without a cap on it, it'll dry out, and I keep them in a large plastic bag until today. So it's pretty easy. You can just put this on there. Two nice holes. I've already put soil in these. The soil is about right here. I'd say it's probably a third. And then I'm going to transplant these tomatoes into that soil and fill it up with my potting mix that I make with compost and Pro Mix. So let me take this thing down out of the way and I'll get back with you. As you can see, I've got all these. I've got 13 here. That's how many I need for the season. They all got about a third of their container size full of my potting soil. And I wish these tomatoes were drier than they are. They're saturated, they're soaked. You can see the roots coming out the bottom of the 6-pack, so it's time for them to go somewhere else into a larger size. All these little hairs on that stem will make roots. These seed leaves, you can bury them as high as you want. The seed leaves will fall off anyway. See how the stems are purple? The darker they get, the less likelihood that a cutworm can eat through it. Now when I put these in the ground, they'll come out of the pot at this height, out of this container. And that will be purple, and hopefully about 2 or 3 feet tall. So you got to be really careful when it's wet. When it's dry, all the soil will stick together. Slowly push up from the bottom. You can see we've got pretty decent roots. To be honest with you, I wish it was more than that, but that's all it needs. I'll put that in there. I'll put some soil around it and firm it up. One tomato plant. Now I'll water this in, even though that is watered, and the water around that little 2-inch square of soil that's around the bottom of this plant will keep it alive for several days. But I want this soil to settle in. This tray is lined with plastic. This is a fairly level table. I can set it on this table and water at one point, and all of them in here will get enough water. I will use still a half a teaspoon per gallon of water at this point. You'll also notice that I marked what it is. It doesn't really matter when you have it in a garden that you'll pick them all, but if I want to go pick some Better Boy tomatoes, I don't want to have to go through 3 different rows to get to them. So I plant them all in one row. This one doesn't want to come out as easily as the last one did. You don't want to break them. It's got a little bit better roots. The bottom of it is absolutely soaking wet. You really need to firm the soil down. That means you got more soil in the pot than if you hadn't firmed it down. It's going to settle anyway. Plus, as you firm it down, it'll hold this plant up straight. You ever notice that you can have a whole bunch of tomatoes sitting together, just like these, but you can have these sitting together and they'll all intertwine together, and they'll stand up like that until the end of the season if you left them on the table. But once you start dividing them up to separate them, to transplant them, when they get a little height to them, they'll fall over in an instant. It's funny how that all of them together can stand, sort of like people in the world, but plants by themselves have a tendency to fall over because they don't have any support. So that's 2 Better Boys planted, and hopefully we've had good rain here for the last 2 days. We hadn't had much rain for probably 3.5 weeks. I'm not complaining about it, but I put a tarp over my little cages outside, but the water still got in here, and they got really soaked. If you transplant, it's a lot better if the soil is dry. You can barely touch the bottom if that was dry. There's no weight to the soil that the plant's in because it's dry, and you can lift it up really easily, and no chance of breaking the roots off and no chance of breaking the plant. I've done this before, so I don't mind showing you how to do it, but it's going to take me a lot longer to plant them this way than if they had dried out. This tray weighs a right good amount. You can lift one up when it's wet and when it's dry, and you can lift them up and know when it's too wet or too dry. Now all we need is another few weeks for these to grow. Thanks for watching.